So if you've got this far, you probably know about my story of being an angry teenager and reading a book which had a larger-than-life character, and wanting to be that character changed my life almost overnight. And since then, it sent me off on a level of curiosity about what heroism is and how we can be inspired to alter and change our value systems and how we're operating within the world. And because of that, you get to learn about concepts which I'm sure you're familiar with, called the hero's journey. So it's my absolute pleasure to be able to interview a guy called Matthew Huttle about that exact idea. Now, he's studied Joseph Campbell's work on the hero's journey for quite a long time, and he's actually used this idea of a hero's journey to navigate challenges around dealing with addiction and overcoming so many obstacles in his life to find new levels. And every time he ends a cycle of the hero's journey, he starts a new one. And every time he slays the demon or the dragon within that journey, he has a subsequent transformation. It's a fantastic way to understand where you are on the journey and what you're currently going through and what transformation you can have. So I'm really hoping that by listening to this, you might be able to understand that you are the hero of your own journey and how you can navigate your own personal story to have the transformation that you want. So let's take a look. Okay, Matthew, welcome, sir. It's good to have you. Good to speak to you again. How are you?
Thank you, Martin. I am very well, and just really happy, proud, and honored to be here.
Proud and honored.
Honored.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
They're a match set.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to be talking a lot about the word hero. Mm-hmm. This is Heroes Month, and as a person who's kind of like, ever since I was early teenager, I've been reading fantasy books all my life. So the idea of a hero going on a quest has always been something near and dear to my heart, even though as an adult, I'm like trying to, you try and suppress it a little bit. It's like, heroes, magic? No, don't need any of that. I do.
I definitely do.
Yeah. And the first thing that I saw was a definition, right? So the definition is: a hero is a real person or a main fictional character who, in the face of danger, combats adversity through feats of ingenuity, courage, or strength.
Okay.
So I'm curious, based on your own kind of personal perspective, do you feel that's an accurate usage of the word?
It's really meticulous. And I would say that what a hero is a lot messier than any textbook or dictionary definition could really ever encapsulate. And you said something interesting. Is like, when we're kids, when we're young, we read all these stories and we watch all these movies and these shows and we get involved in it. And then, you get to be an adult and no, you must put that away. I call crap on that. I really do. And I really think that we need to expand the definition, or at least expand our perception of what a hero is. A hero is anyone who sets out to, as far as Joseph Campbell always defined a hero, is the person who sets out to make things better for his world, for not just himself, but for the people in his world. And I think it's very important to understand that contextually, that it's not just about us. The hero's story is often thought about as being about the hero, but really the hero is the one who facilitates the story, facilitates the narrative, and facilitates our progression as a species. And that, I think, is more important than thinking about just the hero themselves. It's the hero in context with the rest of reality.
Which I guess, if we're kind of thinking about ourselves as individuals
That's right.
and the relatedness to our outside world, there is no other definition than to be the hero of your own story.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. All right, we're done. Later.
Yeah. That's a mic drop moment right at the start. I should have saved that later.
Yeah. No. All right, now everyone's got to really pay attention because it's just going to get a little deeper from here.
Yeah, exactly, right? But, you know, that I do believe that that is a kind of real thing. You know, as a kid, I could certainly recite my heroes off at a heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
Someone would ask me that, I could easily recite them off. And as you get into an adult, I remember kind of asking this question of a whole bunch of people. And, you know, sometimes you get some kind of reasonable answers, but a lot of times most people say either they don't have a hero or it's someone ultra close to them, like like their father or a brother, often. Have you got any kind of idea why we get so scared? Is that also of that word?
It's actually, I think, because as adults, we're told to always tone it down, especially more so in our modern culture. Eddie Izzard, the comedian, always makes me, it's like, well, you're British, so turn your dreams down. And here in America, everyone's always told, go off and do the thing. And I think culturally that might play a bit of a role, but I think overall, humans in general, you're a kid, as Dr. Jordan Peterson always says, your low resolution potential. That's why kids believe in magic and fairy tales and great stories, is because they know that they can channel all that energy, all that potential within themselves to go off and do whatever. And then as you get to be an adult, you kind of square that down to what you're actually going to do. And I think I don't think it's so malicious. I don't think it's intentional, but we kind of get kids to tone, not just we don't just tell them to narrow their direction. We also tell them to tone their dreams down at the same time. And I really think it's kind of incidental. And some people say it's like, it's adults being bitter and trying to squash on kids. I'm not so cynical. I just think it's more a matter of, they did this experiment years ago. I don't think they'll be allowed to do the experiment anymore, where they had a bunch of monkeys in a cage, and they had a bunch of bananas hanging on a rope and a ladder in the middle of this cage. And they put 4 monkeys in, and every time a monkey went up to get the bananas, the whole lot of them, the rest of them, would get sprayed with cold water. And then the other monkeys would, hit them, like, don't do that. We get sprayed. And then what they started to do was replace all the monkeys one by one, so that a new monkey would come in, go to try to get the bananas, and the monkeys would grab him and start hitting him. And then eventually, by the end of the round, there's 4 monkeys who had never been hit with cold water who refused to go up and try to get the bananas. Because and the way it was encapsulated to me, the way I heard the story, is if you could ask those monkeys if they could speak, if you ask one of the monkeys at the end of the trial, why, don't you go up to get the bananas? Why do you hit other monkeys if they try? And they'll tell you, we've always done it that way. And I use that story as an illustration because I think we curtail children's dreams. We try to keep people from dreaming big and going off and seeing their life as this grand adventure simply because we've always done it that way. We haven't, as a culture, we tell great stories and great dreams and these big insights, and you can pin it on different cultures, but I think it goes back as far back to time. And it makes evolutionary sense. And Dr. Peterson talked about this too, is if everybody had a predilection for adventure, our species would have died out, because with adventure comes risk. In order for our species to survive, we have to mitigate risk. So if 1 out of 100 tribesmen is the only person who thinks, oh, let me see what's over those mountains, if that guy goes off, on the other side could be great paradise and wonderful treasures, but if he dies, you only lost 1. If 100 out of 100 tribesmen decide, hey, let's go off and see what's over those mountains, the whole tribe dies, the whole culture goes with it. So in a way, it makes evolutionary sense, but there's that trade-off, is that we as a species don't end up advancing and expanding and growing because of that. And on an individual level, we ourselves have to make the choice. Do we want safety and security, or do we want meaning? That's the trade-off.
Yeah, I was going to ask that, so I'm really glad that you went into that. And it's because there's so many kind of things, like as you start to kind of explore mindfulness, which is something I've had to explore. I've had zero choice with my own kind of healing journey. You kind of realize that the brain is designed to keep us alive. It's designed to keep us protected. And so much of what our brain does and tries to protect us against is based on old ideas, old concepts that don't exist anymore. So it sounds like this thing has crept in as well that used to keep us safe back in those tribal days where we couldn't afford to lose, we couldn't afford that level of risk. Right. But now the dangers are completely different. You don't go off an adventure and risk physical death 99% of the time.
Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about that old genetic programming. And it's in us more, I think, than we believe. A lot of people talk about the culture. They talk about, cultural norms and cultural stereotypes, but to a large degree, a lot of that is really genetic. And one of the examples I use is I used to work for an attorney, and they had these two little Westies, and I was the low end on the totem pole, so I would go out and walk them. I didn't mind. It was great to get out of the office.
I was going to say,
yeah,
that sounds like top of the rung for me.
Yeah, no, I honestly, I wish I could do that all day.
Yeah.
But it's really funny is because Westies were ratters originally. They were royal court dogs, and they would hunt, rats and squirrels and chipmunks to keep them away from the king and his court, especially when they let out in the garden. And these dogs are hundreds of generations removed from that. And we go walking through the neighborhood, they would see cats and birds and other people. They wouldn't really care. If they saw a squirrel or a chipmunk, they would go berserk. And, people say, okay, that's a dog's genetic memory. But there's a reason we bond with dogs so tightly as a species. We have to really give ourselves that much credit. We have a lot of latent programming. I mean, why did I use that story? I don't know. I could have talked about Carl Jung and Bruce Lipton and all these other great, psychologists and scientists. I chose that story because I think it's a little more visceral. I think we understand that the way dogs are and have been for generations, and we're kind of the same. You want to look up the neuroscience on that could back that up? Go right ahead.
Yeah. I'll give that a miss. It's funny, isn't it? Because, I mean, this is way off topic, but, my partner is studying for her doctorate at the moment. And it's kind of an interesting dynamic because she definitely leans into the science, the evidence, the research, whereas I lean more into the impact. I'm like, I don't care. Well, no, I do care about the science.
Well,
not that far, but if it has impact, for example, one of my friends who I interviewed talked about, he committed suicide several times, tried to commit suicide several times, and didn't succeed. And he's taken a million different types of drugs and had a million different diagnoses.
Right.
And it was energy healing, a concept that doesn't really have any kind of evidentiary science to him that allowed him to transform. Impact over science. It's a complete tangent.
No, it's not. I mean, maybe off of what you originally structured this conversation to be, but what's funny is I'm very analytical, like 99% of the time. And for some reason, even in this moment while we're talking, I'm as present as I can be, because my ADHD brain will go off in all these different directions. And I'm actually, you're seeing it in real time. I'm shocked that that's what I chose to use as an illustrative concept, as something more visceral and more emotional, when I normally would go very logical. So, hey, I'm growing.
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. Which it kind of alludes next to my next question anyway, which I think is really, really good. And it's the impact of stories, because I mean, you've researched this a lot more than I have. I'm working on it through several different books. This is my latest one, Awakening the Heroes Within.
Oh my God, I have that one. That's a great book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm hoping so. I am on page like 7 or something. But from what I understand, the concept of the hero's journey was originally kind of discovered through storytelling, through mythology and things like that. So how it applies to kind of narrative structure. It feels like there's more to it than that. So I was hoping you could enlighten
Yeah,
us.
there's okay, so mostly the term hero's journey or monomyth was coined by a mythologist of the 20th century named Joseph Campbell. In 1949, he wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And people don't really understand this, is that George Lucas actually he had written Star Wars, The Star Wars, and he came across Campbell's work and he actually scrapped the old story and rewrote it to follow the monomyth format as Campbell laid it out. And him and Campbell later became really, really good friends. And Campbell was a mythologist with incredible range. He studied medieval Europe. He studied the myths of the Pacific East, the Pacific Islands, Native Americans. He was very deep into their mythologies. And later on in his life, Australian Aboriginals and other cultures. And he based his work off of course, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. So he based his work off of some earlier work, but it was really everything else that people had really tried to quantify with this was very, very loose. Nobody's really paying attention to the details. And when Campbell wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces, he went into excruciating detail. And he mapped out this format for how great stories, for how great epics and myths are told and constantly told, no matter what culture, no matter what time, the best stories. And again, maybe that's why I said it, is that we feel these stories are right. And one of the examples I often use is the difference between Frozen and Frozen 2. Right away, I'm a dad. And Frozen was good. I'm not saying it was bad, but when Frozen 2 came out, everyone gravitated towards that one. Maybe they were just tired of the song from the first one, but they all that one felt better. It felt more right. And if you look at the way the narrative was laid out, Frozen was just kind of a story, where Frozen 2 was an actual epic, was an actual myth, and it was formatted in the Campbellian monomyth structure.
Yeah.
And that's what I think makes it, and people argue with me and go right ahead, but it's the best example I have in modern storytelling of how that mythological structure is laid out in a way that I hope people can kind of take a grasp on. And I'm sure we'll go into more detail about those sections.
Well, like on that note, kind of being a man of a certain age, I had the fortune of growing up with movies that would be like so tightly written towards that structure.
Right.
All of the kind of like 80s underdog movies, like
Rocky was great.
4 of the 5 Rockies were great. But like one of my absolute favorites, in fact, I'd probably say it's my favorite film of all time, is Willow.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
Absolutely perfect in that structure. And in everything in that structure, the hero, Willow, which it was great having a little person play that. That was fantastic. He had a problem to solve. He had to cross from his ordinary worlds, cross a threshold, meet incredible characters, encounter a mentor. Really, he encountered a mentor who didn't want anything to do with him. The Mad Mortigan, love it. And he had to solve it. And one of the deepest parts, and this is where it relates to our lives a little bit in a harder way, is that people don't realize that the hero has to die in some way. Either physically die, like in the Matrix, Neo actually dies and then comes back, or sometimes it's a part of them. A lot of those coming of age tales, like The Sandlot, or any of those kids movies, a part of that hero's innocence has to die. Their childhood, Labyrinth. That was actually a
Nice.
better example of that. Her childhood, she had to let that die. And what was so funny is the woman is temptress, and the atonement with the Father and the apotheosis. These are some of these pieces kind of, some sections of the monomyth can kind of move around, or they can kind of repeat. And then there's like 4 or 5 of them, depending on how you look at it, that are absolutely written in stone. They have to follow one after the other after the other. And Labyrinth is a great example of that. She was tempted to go back to her old way of thinking. She had to deal with her own, immaturity, and then she rejected all that, childlike stuff, and then went after her little brother. So like it was like boom, 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 one section like right after another, kind of written in one scene, which is genius, I think. And in other stories, those kind of some of the sections could be drawn out. Road of Trials is usually where the heroes have to face like they have to lose, they have to fight, and they have to lose, and they have to suffer. I mean, if you look at the Lord of the Rings trilogy, that was like 2/3 of every part of that story. It was just Road of Trials, just over and over and over again. So, and I say this again to think back on our lives and how it applies to our lives, is it applies to our lives because our lives are not a neat succession of events, but neither is every single narrative. And Campbell realized that. So he developed a structure. Again, he extrapolated from other people's work, but he developed a structure in that he had so many more sections in it that were interchangeable and movable, so that it gave it some pliability, that certain things had to be written in stone, as this happens and that happens and this happens, and then other things had a little more flexibility. And I think that's what makes Campbell's work so brilliant, and why story itself is so applicable to our lives in a way that a lot of people don't give it credit for.
Which was actually going to be my next question, and the question is essentially, why are stories so important to us?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, and for me, there's 2 facets to that.
Okay.
And the first one, it sounds like you were going to answer anyways, is around the stories of influence, right? And their impact on us. And then part B of that question is like the stories we tell ourselves, our own personal inner monologue, our inner narrative, and why that's so important. So let's start with the stories of influence, which I think you were alluding to there.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say is that stories are important because they give us context. Now, the first thing, again, you have to come back to the idea that Campbell did. Sometimes talking about this actually chokes me up a little, which is weird. Campbell did a lot of work and analysis on stories from all over. And stories connect us deeply to each other and to ourselves. And when you accept that, not even on faith, you can accept it on science, but you feel it in your bones as well, which is something that, faith really gets into you with. So it gets both hemispheres of the brain. When you understand that your life can have as much meaning as it did for Luke Skywalker or Neo or Odysseus. It doesn't matter. Put any character there, put yourself there. And I'm sure a farm boy who was frustrated and wanted to get out into space thought his life was meaningless until those 2 droids ended up on his uncle's farm. Like, we don't know at what point we're going to get that call to adventure. And a lot of times we overlook it. We don't think it's so important. We don't think of ourselves as important. And back to where we started this conversation, kids know they're important. Kids know that. And that's why I'm not even a Christian, but I love the lesson of Jesus when he put a child on his lap and said, and he said it multiple times in his teachings, to be more like children, to understand and appreciate yourself in not just the tangible ways, but in the absolutely limitless potential that you have. Yep. I really hope there was an answer in there.
Well, I think you've answered both there, because you also touched into like that kind of idea of self-worth. It's like, how can we consider ourselves a hero in any way, shape, or form, right? And how can we so we ignore the call to adventure,
Right.
which is that very kind of inner narrative that I alluded to.
Yes.
So I'm really curious, just on a personal level, some of your favorite stories that have inspired you through this archetype.
Well, obviously, you've heard me quote some of them and just rattle them off because my brain, ADHD is a connectivity kind of thing. So I'm always making connections. But I grew up modeling myself after Captain America and, Superman. I always liked those sterling examples. And it was so funny is for part of my life. So I grew up in the late 80s through the early 90s. I'm like the last of the Gen X kind of that borderline there.
Yeah.
And that when I was a kid, the anti-heroes were getting really big, the Punisher and Spawn and all those kind of guys. And I remember I was playing with a bunch of my friends and we're all going to play superheroes. Okay, we're going to play superheroes and we're all picking out our heroes. And I picked up a little toy gun and I said, I'm going to be the Punisher. And everyone lost it. And they all just kind of laughed. The one kid took the gun out of my hand, gave me a trash can lid, and I'm like, over there, Cap, the game's going to start in 2 minutes. And it's because, and that's one of the things I've said to people, and it's one of the reasons when I started my brand, Hero's Breath, was to really allow people to analyze why they're drawn to certain stories. Why is it every time they go and do cosplay at a convention that they're always kind of dressing as a rogue? It's like, and is usually the kind of person who is always doing what he's told, is kind of bored with his life, kind of slumped shoulders and low self-esteem. But every time he goes to a convention, he can play Han Solo. Every time he plays D&D, he's always playing the rogue or, somebody like big and kind of brash and cavalier. And I think it's one of two things. We either gravitate towards stories that are very much like the person we want to be, or like the person we truly are. And I've kind of done both in my life. I've wanted to be the big, burly, brooding badass, but I'm not. And over the years, I've kind of come to accept that more. So I've tacked into that sterling good guy narrative, although I have a really foul mouth and we're not perfect. So, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was really interesting because I can certainly look back on periods of my own life, and based on who I've admired in those types of environments that you mentioned, sometimes it might have been just drawn to certain characters within a book that would make me want to read the trilogy or the full set. Like I was always a big David Gemmell fan, and before I ever even read David Gemmell, I was and just for the readers who don't know, the watchers, listeners, however you're getting this, David Gemmell is a heroic fantasy writer. So the hero archetype is very much kind of something was of core focus within his writing. But before that, I would I was big into heavy metal music, still am, but just a different type. But so it was like Metallica and Slayer, and it was very aggressive and stuff like that. So I would wear dark clothes. I would be so much so that even my friend circle would call me Morbid Joe, and my name isn't even Joe, right? And then I picked up this book, right? This book called Ravenheart. And this guy, he's not even the main character. His name's Jaim Grymauch. He's the kind of the mentor. He plays the mentor character. But the way that he conducted himself was so inspirational to me that it virtually changed my life overnight, because I wanted to be this character. I wanted to kind of live his values.
Right.
Overnight, I went from being Morbid Joe to hopping out of bed in the morning going, come on, let us attack the day. It was a bit cheesy, but I was 16, so I was allowed.
Screw it, do it now.
That level of influence. Yeah. It had that level of influence.
Yeah. And again, to talk about the difference between something we understand intellectually and something we understand emotionally or viscerally, is that we're just going to do this unconsciously. And I think it goes back to earlier what we were talking about, is this unconscious programming. We get it from the people around us. We get it from our world. I think more constructively, we can take it from our stories. We can take that influence from our stories and we can figure out which characters are we drawn to the most and which characters kind of give us something to shoot for. So I talk a lot about, Superman and Captain America and like the good old white knight. But as I've gotten older, I find myself actually drawn to characters. Well, the character I would love to be, the character I aspire to be by the time I'm older is Uncle Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender. He
Oh, wow.
is, yeah, I know, and I'm like all like energetic and but and believe it or not, I was a lot more like bouncing off the walls when I was in my 20s, and I saw it a bit as a problem. I was very brash. I'm very arrogant. I would very opinionated, and I would just crash into every situation in every room. Sometimes it would work out, and we'd all have a great time, and other times I would just destroy the circumstances around me. So as I knew it was a problem, and I said in my early 20s, I said, I want to, kind of contract this fire within me, not reduce it, just, harness it. And then years later, I encountered this character in Uncle Iroh, and I'm like, all right, so he's wise, he's zen, he's an absolute and total monster, and can destroy anyone or anything, but he keeps that power contained. And he transfers the wisdom that he learns. He is the mentor to pretty much every character in that show at one point or another. And I'm like, I want to be that. I want to be that guy who keeps the balance, who sees the world going to absolute, hell, and knows what the right is, and he stands on it. And which just think of some of the other characters that I've always been drawn to have, but he's a higher level of maturity. And that's something I aim at. And that's what Dr. Peterson always talks about. Set an aim for your life and aim at that. No matter how unrealistic it may seem down the road, you got to give yourself a purpose. You got to give yourself a direction. And he also says, again, not to be a harmless man. A harmless man is not a good man. You want to be an absolute monster, but you want to have that monster under control. So in terms of the story, in terms of the narrative, you don't have to always be the exact same character. You can figure out what characters you're drawn to, and then you figure out what characters you really want to be. And over time, you can develop into whoever you want, maybe within a certain framework. You have certain parameters. You can't be, a loud, boisterous jester if you're always a serious, brooding person. You made some shift in your life, and I'm sure it wasn't overnight in reality, but it allowed you to see more of who you are and more of a brighter person than you had been acting. So you can change that. You're not going to completely change yourself, but you can at least set a goal and work towards being the character for your story that you choose.
Yeah, definitely. And just as you saying that, because I've recently watched the latest season of Cobra Kai, and spoiler alert, kind of mini spoiler alert, but in one of the episodes he goes back to Okinawa, and there are flashbacks of Karate Kid 2 with Mr. Miyagi, and I find myself kind of feeling all nostalgic and tearing up a little bit. I'm like, oh my god, Mr. Miyagi. But yeah, so you said right at the start something kind of which I'd actually written down as a question. So the fact that you brought it up at the start was really interesting with regards to the hero and how he relates to the world and making the world a better place. Right. And the question that I wrote down is the difference between a quest and a hero's journey.
Quests fit into the hero's journey. The hero's journey is the overarching story. And just to make sure people are clear, it does not end. The hero's journey is cyclical. Once you end one cycle, you get a pause, and then you pick up on the next one. Once you start, you don't get to stop. Now, the quests are, think about playing like something like The Witcher. You get side quests, you have the main quest, and that narrative starts to move the character throughout the game. And quest is just part of the hero's journey. It's not everything. The real point of the story is for the hero to develop into somebody who can more positively affect his world, and the quests are just the facilitators of that.
The reason that I kind of brought that up is when I think of like my own personal journey and kind of like the business world,
Mm-hmm.
I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and seeing people
Mm-hmm.
kind of talking about personal development
Mm-hmm.
and how it applies to their careers and everything like that.
Right.
And so they're going on these quests to like make work a better place. Either it's to make
Right.
more money or
Right.
to improve the culture of their workplace or whatever it is, to work with investors, to help out their team, to implement a new technology. It could
To
be
level up.
anything. Yeah. And that's the quest, right? But
Mm-hmm.
and they're talking about personal development. So, I'm kind of learning all these skills, but they're never actually going on the hero's journey, which helps them transform as they are a little bit better, but
Right.
they're not asking
It's
the core
superficial.
questions. Yeah, exactly.
It's superficial. And yeah, I've seen that. And, it's so funny you bring that up, because I've actually been writing, because my blogs, I've been trying to track my own progress, my own journey, as something for people to reflect off of. And I'm right now on my second round through the monomyth, at least as far as I can understand it. And yeah, to a certain point, I kind of got caught recently in this second round working on more of the superficial things than on the deeper stuff for myself that I know I need to work on. And repeatedly, I kept getting smacked by the gods and just kind of kept grabbed repeatedly. It's like, stop it. Nope.
That's
Nope.
what it
Nope.
feels like. That is 100% what it feels like.
It does. And at one point I had, back in the spring, I had completely and utterly failed my woman as temptress phase. And it's not as delightful as it sounds. Woman as temptress is actually just physical temptation. It doesn't necessarily have to be sexual. And I literally got hit with a truck. I got into a car accident, destroyed my car, and I walked out physically unscathed. But I've been driving for 20 years. I have a near perfect record. I had no accidents on my record. I was a very good driver, very alert, very sharp, and I made like a 16-year-old's mistake because my brain just shorted out. It was almost as if someone in the script just wrote it so that I would get into that accident at that moment. And as the gunpowder smell is like kind of still in my nose, I'm saying to myself, this is atonement with the Father. I have gone from one stage to the other because I screwed up the last one. And it was very jarring wake-up call. Not every transition from one phase to the other will be so obvious. Sometimes it's a lot more subtle. And I'm recently getting to my own ultimate boon. And it was actually a friend of mine that pointed it out to me because I had missed it, because I wasn't seeing the forest for the trees. So I don't even remember what your question was or how I got started on this rant and how I kind of blacked out.
No, I like it. It was, I don't, it's something about the difference between a question and a journey. Yeah, the kind of the real work, I guess.
Right, the real work. So anyway, yes, thank you. So ADHD. So the real work for me actually really began after that point, when I had to start asking myself the questions that I had been avoiding up to that point. Because in the pandemic, I could have been focusing on my business more, but I had just gone out and was just doing Uber Eats because I love driving. I love deliveries. It was like playing Grand Theft Auto food, like, pick up the food, take it to the person. It was fun. It was fun. You had like a little map. You had little quests. Actually, you had, make X amount of delivery. It's serious. Make X amount of deliveries within a certain amount of time. You get like an extra $20 bonus or extra points or whatever. And it really felt like I was playing a video game, going on all these little quests, but I wasn't really focusing on the more important work that I had to do to get out of my comfort zone, to push myself in my business more and to make that grow. I was just doing the physically fun work. So at some point, the gods just took it all away from me.
Yeah.
And I was forced to do that deeper work and avoid that. I mean, obviously you have to make money, and I still do. I still have a job. But it was, as you say, like I had to focus more on that deeper stuff. And ever since I have, a lot of that angst and agitation and all we always have a little bit of that malaise, that little bit of agitation, that little bit of something that we always just kind of try to allay in one sense or another with one substance or one activity or another with those neurochemicals. I mean, I'm speaking as a man in recovery, but I think we all do it, or I know we all do it in one way or another. Even if it's just watching garbage television for 5 hours, we're avoiding the world. And I had been doing that enough, and then I had been forced to. But I agreed to go on this journey in the first place years ago, and I knew from the start that there would be no stopping. So I signed on for this, basically.
Yeah, yeah, nice. I really like that. So I want to talk about some of the kind of fragments within the hero's journey.
Okay.
And for anyone watching, there's also going to be a downloadable for the hero's journey, and to find out more details on the full journey and how that applies, because you've mentioned a lot of the segments within that, but it's quite easy to actually kind of just download the image, right, and see, oh, that's at that bit, at that bit. So step one is the call to adventure. And I love, like, again, coming back to kind of my love of fantasy, I set adventure as one of my personal values.
Okay.
And the reason that I took that was because I wanted to use that to reframe times that were difficult or challenging or risky. So it would help to almost reframe fear. So I wouldn't necessarily see it as like this challenging, scary thing. I would see the adventure, which would also allow me to see the curiosity, the wonder, all of the
that's brilliant, man.
Parts of it.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
No, that's actually exactly what you have to do. That's exactly what you have to do. Doctor, I'll get to that in a second. What you're doing is actually neurological reprogramming, something Dr. Peterson tells people to do, especially if you're like an introvert. He uses a great example of like a party. If you're at a party and you're afraid to get away from the wall and go engage with people, he says that's because you're thinking too much about yourself. You're thinking about, oh, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I lay the wrong joke? What if I don't? You have to have some value of yourself and say, I have X, Y, Z skills or experience or knowledge. I can add to this conversation. I can add to that conversation. I can make this a better night for other people if I get my fat ass off the wall and actually go out and engage with people and engage with life. And that's really what the call to adventure is that moment of engagement where life comes and finds you. And now it's your opportunity to say yes or no. And sometimes sometimes we're very hesitant on that. And that's where that refusal of the call, which is an optional phase. It's phase 2. It doesn't always happen, but sometimes the hero hesitates and says, no. In our lives, a lot of people, I think, hit the snooze button when they get that call. They just kind of ignore it. And they ignore it and they ignore it and they ignore it their whole lives. They always had an impulse, go start your own business, go, learn dancing, go learn the violin, go do something. And you have this impulse to go on this adventure and you keep saying no. And I think that's what creates the NPC or the villain. But that's an argument for another time.
Yeah. That was really, really, really well put. So much so I've got 0 follow-up questions on that particular piece. But because we've already talked about the character from The Last Airbender. I've never watched it or seen it, so I can't remember the name. What was
Uncle
it again?
Iroh.
Uncle Iroh.
The Great General Iroh.
The Great General Iroh. I apologize. And obviously Mr. Miyagi and that idea of kind of the mentor side of it, the mentorship piece.
Yeah.
I might be completely misinterpreted because it's not something I've explored a lot, but I don't see it a lot within the modern world, at least not from a conscious standpoint. Yes, I think getting a coach is a relatively normal idea, particularly in certain structures like the health and fitness world, which I know is your background as well. But like, is it just a case that it's just not as obvious as we might think it is to find that mentor?
Oh, anyone who says they can't find a mentor has obviously never paid attention. You have in your pocket a device that can connect to the entire internet, the sum of all human knowledge. What are you using it for? Cat videos and political arguments? Tai Lopez was somebody I had started following and listening to while I was in the early stages of my recovery from alcoholism. And and it wasn't so much. It was interesting. It was a very. It was funny. I was in a very, very dark place, and this very spiritual guy I met in a mystic shop, who ran a mystic shop not too far from where I was living at the time, told me, after we had talked for some time, and he heard my sob story, getting a divorce, careers down the drain, blah blah, and he said, "You should go pursue money." And I said, "What? Spiritual guy? I should go pursue money?" He says, "Because you got everything backwards." He says, "You're all up in here. You're not living in the real world. You don't have appreciation for the tangible things." He says, "Go pursue money." So I started listening to this guy, Ty Lopez. He was the guy with in his garage with his Lamborghini and his books, that guy, And he had talked a lot about mentorship and a lot about how you have the entire internet to go stalk people and learn after them, whether they're physically there with you, teaching you, guiding you, or you're just going to track their careers. And from there, I actually took Ty Lopez and Brian Rose, which led me to Peter Sage, which led me to, so many other teachers, and Dan Pena and Gary Vaynerchuk. And I just started listening to all of these guys, partially as I was discovering more about myself. And I kind of looked for the threads of where they all agreed. And I didn't have one mentor at that point. That spiritual guy is actually more of a goddess, and which we'll get to later. But it was, I created like a composite mentor, kind of what Marcus Aurelius did. He was a Stoic kind of by default, but he never really labeled himself a Stoic. Which Stoicism was actually a very particular set of philosophy back then. He never drew to one particular teacher. He took from all of them and created his meditations more for himself. And now we look at that as one of the greatest works on philosophy and thought and self-improvement in the history of all of human civilization. And he was just pulling things that were useful for him. So your mentor is whoever you learn from that guides you on your journey.
I think there was actually it was a small section, but I thought it was one of the best sections of the book in Think and Grow Rich, where he talks about having, I think he called it like a inner mastermind or something like that. It was a while ago
mastermind
since I read
principle,
it. Yeah. And it was almost like a meditative state where you would imagine yourself in a board of directors, where you're the chairperson of the board of directors and all of your mentors are on this board, bringing their own personalities and stuff like that.
It gets so deep into that. And that's actually, as a pagan, that's something I do for myself, as I go off into nature and I talk with the gods. Now, are the gods really there? Do I really expect some divine spirit to come and talk to some random ginger on Long Island? Not entirely sure. But what Napoleon Hill had said is that when he would be in those sessions with his mentors in his mind, they would say things to him he would never have thought of. They would come up with solutions he couldn't have. They would say things to him that he would never have said to himself if it was just his imagination. Now, is this something deep in our unconscious minds that we have a greater sense of knowing? Psychologists would say that. Spiritual people would say, no, the gods are with you. The gods are with you. You made a good sacrifice. The gods are with you. I'm like, well, okay, the gods are with me, or I'm hallucinating. Either way, it helps.
Yeah. Impact. That's the impact piece.
I'm not really questioning it. It's a gift horse to me.
Yeah, exactly. And the next thing I want to talk about is this idea of kind of what was the quote now? It mentioned the supernatural world of wonder. I think it was just on the Wikipedia page, actually. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Yep. Fabulous forces are there encountered and a decisive victory is won. The hero goes back from the mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man.
Yeah, it's all the way around.
But this region of supernatural wonder, right? We can put that into a story like Willow, who just leaves his village of mechanics and logistics and nurturing of children and very much kind of a tribal environment. Then all of a sudden he's thrust into this world of magic and combat and things that he's never, ever seen before. It's an obvious supernatural world. Yeah. How does that apply to real life?
Well, I'm going to use myself as an example. In this last round, after I had kind of stopped the podcast, my business really wasn't moving anywhere. My brand wasn't going anywhere. And I got a literal call to adventure. I got a recruiting call to this company that does financial education and outreach. And there's some money to be made. You know, it's a full-on financial firm. It's a licensed profession, but they work with like the average citizen. You know, they don't work with just like the uber rich like most financial advisors do. So I interviewed, I applied, I got accepted. I had to get a state license. I had to get my own like, you know, liability insurance and the whole thing. And the first time I went, I've been to a bunch of like the training meetings. Trainings are all free. I mean, it's a fantastic setup for somebody who's not an entrepreneur or wants to be one, or somebody who is an entrepreneur and wants to learn more about it and get better and learn about finance and concepts and stuff. It's great. The first time though, I didn't go to a regular training. I went to what they call a full-timers meeting. It's for the people who are able to quit their jobs and do this full time. And I'm sitting there amongst all these. I mean, this one woman used to be a painter. This other person used to be a bartender. And now they're making like, you know, high five, low six-figure salaries. And they're suddenly throwing out all these deals and they're putting numbers on the board and they're recounting the week and they're having, it's like a powwow, like a power meeting. And I'm sitting there just going, I am in way the hell over my head. Like here I am, this, you know, massage therapist, Pilates instructor, martial artist, vlogger, trying to get into like the world of finance. And now they're talking, oh, this deal will hit there and we're going to be at 18%. And I'm just like, numbers. And that's the experience for the hero when he enters the belly of the whale, when he crosses that threshold. When I signed my application, when I sat down for the trainings, when I learned about a lot of financial concepts that they don't teach the average person, especially not in school, I will never be able to go back to the ignorance I had. My ordinary world of just kind of winging it financially is gone forever. I can't turn back. And that's what happens for the hero. They cross that threshold, they go into this new, strange world, and there's no turning back for them now. So like my ignorance was shattered. I knew I was in over my head. I was literally hyperventilating in the office. And that's a very tangible an experience, I think, as I can give for your audience is whatever you want to do. I interview on my YouTube channel, I interview creatives, painters, photographers, martial artists, whoever. I've interviewed a bunch of different people. And they always say the same thing. It's like, if you're on the fence and you don't know if this is something you want to do, just get out there and do it. Prepare to have the bejesus scared out of you. And sometimes people confuse this with the road of trials because it's so scary for the hero. And it's not a trial. You're just here to get baptized by fire. And Moana actually was a great example of that when she goes into the cave into that realm of monsters under the ocean. Perfect illustration for exactly the way the belly of the whale is supposed to feel to you. So if you're on the fence about something, just accept that you're going to screw it up. You're gonna be scared shitless. You might as well just do it.
Yeah. I like that. I feel that's kind of like a very visceral sign that you're on the right path as well.
Oh yeah.
If you're experiencing that.
Yeah. 100%.
And you've mentioned the road of trials quite a bit. And I've also written down here death and rebirth, because that sounds terrible. But we've already touched on that a little bit.
Yeah.
So what are those two elements, the road of trials and the death rebirth part?
Death rebirth comes later. Road of trials is just death. It's just death. It's just losing. It's just, again, you know, in my road of trials, my first round, I'll rewind even further. My first round, my road of trials was washing out of massage and Pilates. Couldn't hack it. I had a family. I was drinking heavily pretty much every night. And there was a lot of reasons for that. I had a baby at the time, a wife that I was just roommates with. Everything was coming undone because the lies that I had told myself, the bill was coming due. And I was just losing. And I had to realize that, and I had to deal with that. And that's all the road of trials is. It is loss and more loss. We've all had these moments in our lives. It's, God, why me? How much more can I take? Never ask that, because God will take it as a challenge, and will just continue to hit you. And that's all the road of trials really is. It's just part of the journey. You have to accept loss.
And then the death.
That comes later. What comes after that is the meeting with the goddess, which, as I said, that spiritual man that I had encountered, he's owner of a crystal shop, and he really turned everything around for me. The meeting with the goddess is your moment of healing. So in that point, my soul needed to be healed. I needed to stop repeating the same action, expecting a different outcome, how Einstein defines insanity. And I needed some guidance, and he gave me that. In the story, the goddess, in ancient stories, it was a goddess. That's why Campbell called it that. But if you look at like the old spaghetti westerns, when the good cowboy gets driven out of town by the cattle rustlers, that old prospector kind of like nurses his wounds, like digs a bullet out and gives him a bottle of whiskey. That's the goddess in that hero's story. It's the time of healing. On this last round has been my friend Andrea. She's an incredible acupuncturist, and she's been helping me in the traditional style of acupuncture, not just poking me with needles, but actually helping me work with the energetic and emotional and mental blockages that I have. So that the Road of Trials meeting with the goddess, again, that's that part of that story where these things have to follow one after the other, because if you're just going to take loss, you're just going to take damage, and you don't take time to heal, you're never going to make it through the rest of the journey.
Yeah. I can recall mine actually now.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I think back, and now that you've kind of talked about it in that way, so back early 2019, when I just got back from Bali after kind of depression and suicidal ideation.
Okay.
I started attending these weekly mindset meetings. And this was for a course on how to learn how to do LinkedIn better, of all things. Yeah. But because it's kind of like producing content and putting yourself out there, there was like these weekly mindset calls that would get you through those barriers, those mental blocks. On one Wednesday, one of the attendees, who was an older lady, had literally just lost her mum. But she was talking in the meeting about how she was sad for that. She was grieving for that, but she was also grateful for that happened, because her mum was in a lot of pain a lot of the time. She's very elderly. So she was grateful that she was finally at peace, but then she also felt shame for feeling grateful. And just the level of complete honesty she came to the meeting with was insane. And then the next week, that gave me the courage to share some of my story for the first ever time. I'd never, ever been vulnerable. I thought I had, but I'd never been vulnerable before a day in my life. So that was my meeting, I guess.
Yeah. And that's that shift for you to be able to heal. And then after that, once you've healed up, then you can go down deeper. And the best for the next one, Atonement with the Father, George Lucas set it up better than anyone ever has in cinema or literature ever. When Luke Skywalker went into the cave in Dagobah, for years I thought that whole scene was bull and was out of place and pointless. And now I realize all of the movies came down to that cave. Came down to what Yoda said, when Luke asked what's in the cave, he said, what you take with you. When he fought the Phantom Vader, when he cut off his head and he saw his own face, Atonement with the Father are the deep, dark issues you're not dealing with. And these could be your issues. These could be your parents' issues. That's why it's called Atonement with the Father. These are the things that you've been carrying around. Carl Jung said, the no tree can reach heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The level the hero will rise in the story is completely dependent on how deep into his own cave he goes. And I think it was Jung also who said, it was Campbell. I'm gonna slaughter if I try to quote it exactly. Is that the dragon that we're afraid to face is hiding the treasure that we need the most. And that's what Atonement with the Father is. It's facing the darkest, deepest, worst parts of ourselves. And then comes the death and rebirth.
Right.
An apotheosis. So it's like, we start with our trials, you get the shit kicked out of you, and then you heal. And then you atone. And then you're tempted. And then you atone. And then you get the death and rebirth. In the apotheosis is where that old part of yourself has to die. All the things, like you were saying, the things you didn't think that you thought you were being vulnerable until that moment. Then you really had to dig down deep, and you really had to get those things out. And that part of yourself that had this idea of, well, I'm this person. Once you start shedding that, you find out who you really are, and then you become totally and utterly invulnerable to whatever else life has to throw at you. That's why it's called the apotheosis. Did you ever see a political dissident in probably one of these like third world countries? It was one of my favorite pictures. I don't know what country it was. I have no context on the picture. It was a guy who's blindfolded. He was at the gallows. It was fairly modern. I mean, he looked like he was wearing like maybe like 80s or 90s garb. And he had the noose right around his neck, blindfolded, hands behind his back. And you see him just actually like giving the peace sign, like while like seconds before death, because he believed in his cause. Whoever the hell this was, whatever country this was, I don't even know. But you see, it wasn't just pure defiance. It was that he had accepted everything about himself, about his life, about his mission, about his purpose. And this is the moment he was going to physically die. We have to get to that point where we're willing to be vulnerable, like you, and to actually accept that whatever we thought about ourselves, whether it was our, our orientation, our religion, whatever conception we had built that wasn't working for us, once that dies, we're free to do absolutely anything. And kind of paraphrasing off Fight Club, because that's one of the best films ever.
Yeah. I like that a lot. I like that. And then you get the opportunity to explore what you're going to give back.
Exactly.
I've been coached with a nice and simple phrase: your mess is your message.
Yes. Oh, Mel Robbins had said that, but I don't think she was the originator. I don't know who said that.
I have no idea. Yeah.
Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins had said that first.
That would explain things for me. Yeah.
Your mess is your message. Yes.
Yeah. But you've got to go through those trials.
Yes. Oh, and I realized I kind of skipped between meeting with the goddess and atonement was actually woman as temptress. That's where you have to kind of detach yourself from your physical form and those physical temptations. Like I said, in this round, I screwed that up. So when you get between healing and atoning is that temptation, just kind of fall into yourself and go back to your old habits. And that's something we really have to make sure we set ourselves, that it's going to be that difficult. You just got to keep plugging on no matter what it is.
Because if you've been beaten down, the first thing you would want to do is to return to a place of previous comfort.
What what you're familiar with. Don't do that.
Yeah. Well, I did that exact thing for such a long time. Because
me too. That's why I drank.
I just went back to my old way of doing business, right? My own financially secure, stable business that would cause me such levels of stress and depression and pain, and insomnia was rife at this point, because I knew it was financially secure.
Right.
But this was an events business. So then COVID came along, blew that up, went from like a very, very lucrative business to flat zero. So it was like, okay, there was my version of the truck hitting me. Yeah,
the gods took it away from you. But on some level, you were ready for it. Ready for it. You had at some point agreed. Now, for me, I physically remember after my road of trials in my first round saying, all right, I'm ready. I'm going to go. And it was like kind of almost this message from the gods. It's like, just wait. Just remember, once you say go, you ain't ever going to stop. And all of a sudden, just one day, I just felt like something saying go. And I went, and it just, I'm not going to go into every detail. You read the blogs. And I just tore ass after that. And that's kind of what, like what you say, you have to set yourself up for that level of success by accepting the call in the first place.
Yeah. And I literally have no more questions. No, I do have one question that I like to end on, which throws people off. So if we need to have an editing gap, this is totally fine. What is one question or topic area that you would love to talk about but never typically get asked?
Oh, geez. Yeah, you're right. It does throw me off. I don't know. I am very much open to anything. I'm very much an open book. There's very few subjects I don't talk about. There's, unfortunately, that's a problem. Is there's very few subjects I don't talk about, and things I probably should shut the hell up about. Um, what? Oh, shit.
So this is like my way of almost kind of saying, because I've got, questions here, I've got things that I would want to learn, but I've in no way studied it or looked at it in anywhere near the level of depth that you have. So my questions may have missed bits that people might find useful. I feel like we've covered off a lot of the different steps to help people identify where they
Oh,
might
we
be
didn't
on the
even get
journey
through
and
like the
pitfalls.
tail end of it. We didn't even get
Oh,
through
yeah?
like the tail end of it. I mean, there's so many more bits to go. Like, when people get a chance to, I always keep this with me when I'm talking about the hero's journey. It's the entire map. I use it for reference. When you get to the ultimate boom, I want to make sure I get this point driven
Yes,
home,
definitely.
is because the ultimate boon is the moment where your realizations you get in the apotheosis, when you kill that part of yourself. The ultimate boon is when the rubber meets the road, when the hero faces the bad guy again. That was that final battle with Sauron's forces at the end of Lord of the Rings. That's taking on the Death Star. That's that moment where you really force, where you take all those lessons, all that magic aid, the supernatural help, where you take that and you actually apply it. For me, like when I wanted to start this brand in the first place, like I had to come up with it. That was my apotheosis. I came up with Hero's Breath. Oh, that's great. Then I had to get it branded. Then I had to get a website. Then I had to get it on social. Then I had to actually do the stuff. And that's where I think a lot of people get tripped up, is they have this great idea, they have this great realization, and they don't know what the hell to do with it. That's where I say, like, you have to cross. And then that's also going to lead you to crossing back, take the things that you learned, blend it with the person you were after you've made peace with those dark parts of yourself, because all this starts to come back into play. Then you return to your ordinary world and you share it with everybody, and you do your best to try to disseminate that information. And that's your freedom to live. That's the unhappily ever after. I say unhappily ever after because if you do it right, freedom to live turns into waiting for dragons, which is what I call it. Because once I had gotten to the end of my first round, I was just waiting for the second round. And I think actually maybe that's the best way to answer your question, is like, what would I want people to really understand is that once you get to a certain point where you've mastered what you wanted to master, where you've completed the task you want to complete, a lot of people get really depressed at that point. They're like, oh, well, like, what do I do now? Because they made their new identity. Yes, you have to make a new identity for yourself. When they make their new identity about this amazing quest that they just went on. The end of Lord of the Rings was great because it showed the hobbits like despondent, like nobody gives a shit that they just saved the world. Nobody, they're just kind of there. And that's the way life is. You go on, you have kids, you change diapers, you fix the gutters on the roof. You go on with your life, but it's not like the adventure actually ends. You go into a whole new level of adventures, as long as you're willing to accept that this life itself that you live is this grand adventure. Don't be Walter Mitty. Like, don't escape into your head. That was one of the things when Stan Lee died that really aggravated the crap out of me. Was everyone was talking about his great stories, how he helped them escape. I'm like, it's not escape. No, it's not escape. This was the allegory for your life. You got to be Wolverine. You got to be Psylocke. You got to be Captain America and Spider-Man. You got to advance yourself through the stories that Stan Lee helped tell to us. This wasn't your chance to run away, but sadly, that's what most people do. So I would say the thing that I want talked about more is that we don't get stuck in a world of fantasy. We don't get stuck in a world of reality. As the master of two worlds, we blend them. And that's how you have the most effective life. And Dr. Peterson talks about, it's not about the pursuit of happiness, it's about the pursuit of meaning. Finding meaning in your life is what makes for happiness, because happiness is like cotton candy. It'll fill you up, but it won't really nourish you. Meaning and going through the hero's journey and going through all the hardships and embracing the suck and loving every agonizing second of it, the highs and the lows, the victory and the defeat. That's what gives your life meaning, and that's what I want people to really focus on, is to blend it all together into a story that you have the power to create.
And Matthew, I'm so glad we were able to end it on yet another mic drop moment. I was so worried that I'd spent myself right at the start, but that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you
Thank you.
so much for sharing everything that you shared with us today, including your being very vulnerable with your personal story, but also your wisdom and how you've applied the hero's journey and the stories that you've told us today.
Martin, thank you so much for having me. This was actually one of my goals, and you helped facilitate my ultimate boon by being here. So I really appreciate you asking me to come on and do this, and I hope everything that I yammered about has some value for other people.
Heck yeah, I'm certain it will.